Welcome to Module 20 of AP Environmental Science. This module should be a review of some of the community ecology information that you learned in past biology classes. So I'm going to review briefly through some of it, but go more into depth in other parts. Now, the big takeaway from community ecology is that when two different species are living together, and whether they're living together in harmony or one's a predator, the other's a prey, in any case, when two species are living together or closely interacting, we call that symbiosis or a symbiotic relationship. Now, typically, that relationship involves competition. So competition means this struggle to obtain enough resources. So maybe it's two birds that are both going after the same type of food source. So they're competing directly against each other to see which one gets more of the food. Now there's this thing called the competitive exclusion principle. And the competitive exclusion principle is a big deal when we're looking at community ecology. And this is the idea that there can only be one winner. So when two species are competing over that same resource, only one of them is going to win. And that's this experiment right here. So this experiment was done by a guy by the name of Gauss. He grew two separate species of a paramecium. This one up here was grown in one container, this was grown in a separate container. By themselves, they could grow to be quite large populations. But when he put the two paramecium together in the same container, in that same little microhabitat, he found that only one of them was able to obtain that large population size. And that's because they were directly competing with one another. One of them was the winner, the other one not so much. And we see this out in the environment all the time. There's only one winner when two species are competing for the same resource. Now, species can avoid this competition by doing what's called resource partitioning. Your textbook doesn't have this picture, but there's a really great illustration where there's a pine tree and the sections of the tree are distributed between different species of birds. So some species of birds prefer to live in the topmost branches and build their nests and get their food up there, while others particular bird species prefer to live in those bottom branches. So they've divided or partitioned out that particular tree as a resource, so that way they're no longer directly competing with each other. Now there's several classes or types of symbiosis. The typical ones that you hear about are mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So mutualism, this again should be a review from your biology classes. In a mutualistic relationship, both organisms benefit. On the AP exam, you'll need to know a good example of each type of symbiosis. Commensalism, this is when one organism benefits and the other one just doesn't care. A good example of commensalism would be lichen or moss growing on the side of a tree. The tree doesn't care if the moss is there or not. It's not helping, it's not harming. However, the tree is providing a great home for the moss or the lichens. So the lichens are benefiting, but the tree just doesn't care. And then parasitism, predation, and herbivory. All three of those are kind of the same grouping, where one species benefits, the other one is either harmed or killed. Predation means that you're actively killing an animal, typically, when we think about predation. Herbivory is eating a plant. Parasitism, the organism that serves as the host, is harmed. They may die, they may not die, but if they are going to die, it's not going to be right away. So there's a lot of parasitic wasps that will lay their eggs on caterpillars, and when the egg hatches, the larval stage will actually liquefy and eat that caterpillar. So that caterpillar is serving as the host initially, and then eventually just gets eaten by the larvae. And then the wasp flies away, and now we have a new wasp. That's parasitism. All right. There's some really great examples in your textbook, ways that Organisms also try to avoid becoming prey, and ways that they avoid being eaten or being preyed upon. All right. Last topic of this module is Keystone Species. Keystone Species is a huge topic within environmental science, and the classic example is the lowly beaver. Now, a keystone species is a species that has a small relative abundance but has a larger than expected impact on the ecosystem. So in this particular ecosystem here, there's relatively few beavers when you compare it to how many organisms benefit from the changes that the beavers make to that ecosystem. Keystone species can also be predators. The example in the text is sea stars preying upon organisms like mussels in intertidal communities. They could also be wolves as a keystone species, preying upon elk and deer, trying to keep those populations in balance. What we're finding is oftentimes these keystone predators, when they are present, the overall biodiversity, so the overall variety of species present, is much, much higher when we have the keystone predator than when they're gone. So that's really important to understand. Keystone species, there's very few individuals, but those few independent individuals have a much larger than expected impact on the ecosystem. And these keystone species, again, can be what's called an ecosystem engineer. So an ecosystem engineer is a keystone species that kind of creates habitat. So a good example of an ecosystem engineer is the beaver. So by a beaver building a dam across the river, they're actually creating this kind of deeper pool habitat that allows a whole bunch of other organisms to live in that area. Felt like that went really fast. And that's the end of Module 20. Again, a lot of this is review of your biology classes. We'll go more in depth in class, but make sure to bring good notes and good questions to class, and I will address them.